Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, Turkey and the EU try to agree to a refugee deal that will lessen visa restrictions for Turkish citizens. Could the migrant crisis net Turkey its long-desired EU membership? And Baidu faces difficult questions. The death of a college student who received ineffective treatment from a Baidu-recommended hospital has roused the public outrage about the company's significant business ties to the Chinese medical system. It is supposed to be an important day for Turkey-EU relations. The European Union's Executive Commission said Wednesday that Turkey has met most of the 72 criteria needed for a visa waiver and give conditional backing to visa-free travel for Turks, inviting member states and EU lawmakers to endorse the move by June the 30th. Earlier, Turkish Parliament has approved a law on setting up a panel to monitor discipline for law enforcement officials. It is one of the last hurdles remaining before the country wins visa-free access to Europe for its nationals. All eyes in Turkey are turned to the EU as excitement increases for potential free travel into Europe. CCTV's Michael Badawi filed this report earlier from Istanbul, explaining why the visa-free travel matters for many Turks.
Visa-free travel in the Schengen area, an idea many Turks dream of, something they can take pride in. If it in fact becomes a reality as part of the controversial EU-Turkey migrant deal, no doubt it will have a meaningful benefit for Turkish citizens. The migrant deal is crucial for Europe as it desperately aims to halt illegal migration from Turkey into the EU. According to the European Commission, Turkey has been doing its part, as figures show arrivals on the Greek islands dropped to less than 100 from an average of 10,000 a day. Other conditions include the EU taking in a Syrian refugee for every illegal refugee Turkey takes from the Greek islands. Turkey is also expected to receive more financial aid and progress on its EU accession process. If Turkey fulfills the 72 legal and technical conditions put forth by the European Commission for visa-free travel, it will be up to EU governments and the European Parliament to approve the decision by the end of June.
For millions of Turkish citizens, the potential lifting of visas to the Schengen zone is an incredibly exciting development and significant achievement they attribute to the Turkish government.
The Turkish government has put a lot of effort into making this happen. They have made a great contribution. To get a visa to EU countries, we usually have to go to the consulate, wait in line, fill in forms, prepare the requested documents, get invite letters from the countries we want to go to. There is so much hassling.
If, following thorough evaluation, Turkey is granted visa-free travel to the Schengen zone, it will likely strengthen Turkey-EU cooperation, a critical relationship, as both sides need each other to continue dealing with the ongoing refugee crisis. Michal Bardavit, CCTV, Istanbul.
For more on the topic, particularly the relations between Turkey and the EU, we are joined in Ankara, first of all, by Mr. Mustafa Kutlay, who is an assistant professor from the Department of International Relations at Top University of Economics and Technology. And also in Ankara, we are joined by Dr. Bülent Alireza, who is a director and senior associate for the Turkey project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies based in the United States. And now he is in Ankara with us. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Really, how exciting is this, Professor Kutlay, for Turks to be able to travel to the European countries visa-free?
Thank you very much. Actually, this is quite an important step. Actually, the Turkish government invested a lot to this project, and right from the very beginning, Turkish Parliament was working very hard to meet all 72 criteria. The report, the European Commission report today, acknowledged that Turkey completed 67 criteria so far, and 5 more remains. And it seems that over the next month, Turkey will continue working on these remaining criteria. And most probably, after Turkey will complete this criteria, then the ball will be on the European Parliament and European Council's court. But the Turkish government currently is, for understandable reasons, excited, and it seems the recent situation a progress.
Dr. Ali Riza, though, is it really that urgent for Turkey to join the EU? After all, EU has many problems at this moment, and Turkey seems to pay already quite a lot of price, at least politically. First of all, receiving all the migrants coming from Greece, and secondly, doing so-called 75 criteria. How much Turkey has to give in order to get?
Well, you know, the question of Turkey's EU membership is not a subject for discussion in the near future. I mean, that's something that Turkey wants to accelerate, and it was part of the deal that was cut on the refugee issue, that more chapters would be opened in the near future in order to accelerate that process. But in the immediate future, what we're discussing is, as your reporter said, something that is probably the most substantial byproduct of Turkey's engagement with the EU for Turkish citizens, which is the ability to travel without visas in the EU. And from that point of view, if and when it does materialize and the other parts of the deal relating to the visa-free travel are undertaken by the Europeans, this will be very significant. As for Turkey's EU membership, as I said, that's not going to happen for some time yet in the near future, if it happens at all.
That is not likely to happen despite what Turkey has already done. Turkey has made what some believe significant contributions in terms of bringing down the number of migrants flocking into the EU. Take a look at this. Figures show that over 9,000 migrants arrived in Italy by the sea in April this year, down from over 16,000 in the same period last year, and only 3,200 migrants arrived in Greece in April, a lot less than over 13,500 last April. Certainly that has a lot to do with Turkish role. But is it really worthwhile, Dr. Ali Riza? I know you have been really the Turkish expert now in the world, but observing from afar, since you are mainly based in the United States, what do you think about that, quote-unquote, that sacrifice, that token Turkey has to bring out in order to gain?
Look, I mean, the most important and probably the most troublesome aspect of this deal is that it would not have happened if it wasn't for the pressure of the refugees. Turkey and the EU have been trying to engage each other. Turkey's on the road to EU accession. Turkey's been demanding the Schengen visa-free travel for a long time. But the only reason that the Europeans have moved at this particular juncture is because of the pressure of the refugees. Now, Turkey agreed to cut down the number of refugees who are going from the Turkish mainland to the Greek islands and then to Greece and on to Europe, only if the Europeans were willing to take Syrians on a one-to-one basis, and equally importantly, to ease visa travel, to provide visa-free travel, and to open the way to EU accession down the road. Now, this issue came up when President Obama was in Europe meeting with Chancellor Merkel, in particular of Germany, who's the architect of this deal. From the US point of view and from the point of view of the Germans, engaging Turkey is, of course, very important in the short run because of the refugee issues, and also because Turkey being critically located is important for the strategic goals of the Western Alliance, the United States and its European allies. The question is whether you have such a short-term deal with long-term implications. That's what we need to discuss.
That is exactly the question. Professor Kutlay, we all understand politics changes, situations evolve. Well, at this moment, Turkey still have 5 more criteria to be met in order to get the visa-free travel for its citizens to the EU. But things could change, and therefore those criteria could be very difficult to be met, as we all understand. So, Professor Kutlay, what do you make of it? I mean, the enormous amount of effort Turkey is making, is it really worthwhile? And has Turkey bear very clearly in mind that things might change, criteria might change, others preconditions might also evolve?
Yes, you are absolutely right. The remaining 5 criteria are politically very sensitive criteria because they include, for instance, fight against corruption, cooperation in judiciary, protection of personal data, and revising the legislation on terror. The European Union wants Turkey to narrow down the definition of terrorism, and it wants Turkey to act in a more proportionate way in dealing with terrorist organizations. And on the other side of the coin, you know, Turkey is now under attack of a brutal terrorist organization, and the Turkish government and policymakers are very sensitive on this issue, and we have a very short time period. The Commission asks Turkey to meet these criteria up to the end of June. So in a 1 month period, Turkey is expected to fulfill these criteria, and these are politically very sensitive ones. So in the incoming month or days, I think we will discuss these issues more and more. The Turkish side will try to convince Europeans, and on the other side, the Europeans will insist most probably that they will not water down the criteria or dilute the criteria for the sake of refugee deal.
Dr. Ali Reza, you understand this probably better than any one of us, that recently, particularly when you look at politics anywhere in the world, usually strategic goals always give way to short-term priorities. That's true in the United States, that's true in the EU countries, that's true in China, that's also true in Turkey as well. But when you think about this, is this a really sensible judgment coming from the Turkish government? After all, when these migrants coming into Turkey, it is very hard to judge as to the backgrounds they're having, what they're up to, whether they're in any way related. I'm not suggesting any specific things between migrants and terrorism, but certainly this could be a danger. What do you make of this? Or is this really just a political game being played by the current Turkish administration?
Look, I was down on the Turkish-Syrian border over the weekend in the province of Hatay, and I saw the refugee camps for myself. And now, irrespective of whether Turkey cuts a deal with the Europeans or not, it has a refugee problem. There are over 2.5 million Syrian refugees inside Turkey. Hundreds of thousands of them have actually then moved on to Europe. Many of them, I think, would love the opportunity to do so. Now, what is in it for Turkey in terms of this deal with the Europeans is that it helps deal with the refugee problem inside Turkey with the help of the Europeans, because the Europeans are meant to provide billions of dollars in assistance, which Turkey needs in order to deal with its refugees. If, as part of the deal that's cut on the refugees, Turkey is able to get the visa restrictions lifted, and also to get an acceleration of the EU process, and to underline its importance for the European Union, for the Western Alliance, for the United States in the process, that's a winner. I mean, there are short-term problems that Turkey is dealing with, but at the same time, it's trying to pursue long-term goals. Whether they work or not, is, as I said, that's the question that I think that all of us analysts will have to look at.
Very interesting, Dr. Ali Reza. You talk about the Turkey itself has a problem of refugees anyway. So, Professor Kutlay, which make us to ask this question: is Turkey trying to hide its own refugee crisis in the name of a bigger one, which is evolving also in the inside the EU?
Actually, yeah, the situation is very difficult for Turkey. In the current situation, there are more than 2.5 million refugees in Turkey, and these people are living in difficult conditions, and by itself, Turkey cannot solve this problem. And in the long run, these Syrian refugees will create important problems because they have difficulties to integrate into the Turkish labor market because of their education levels, because of their linguistic barriers and the cultural differences. And in the current situation, the unemployment rate in Turkey is already above 10%, with almost 20% among youth unemployment. So in such a kind of situation, Turkey is also trying to convince European partners to cooperate with itself in order to overcome this refugee problem. But by itself, Turkey obviously will encounter significant challenges in the incoming years.
Yes, indeed. And now we are also joined from Brussels, inside the EU, Ms. Amanda Paul, who is a senior policy analyst at the European Policy Center. Amanda, you are coming at the right time, I have to say. And Ms. Paul, help us to understand, when is that $3 billion of, or rather euro, 3 billion euro, that EU has promised Turkey in terms of dealing with the refugee crisis likely to be delivered? And how does the European countries inside the EU understand the logics behind Ankara's desire to make all these efforts in order just to get a visa-free travel?
Well, I think that's putting it too simply. It's not about making all these efforts to get a visa-free travel. Visa-free travel is something that Turkey was actually promised nearly half a century ago in their original association agreement. And it's a very important thing for Turkish society. I don't think you can imagine how humiliating it is trying to apply for a visa from Turkey, queuing up outside consulates, often for hours, being asked to bring along numerous papers only to be refused. So it's something that's owed, I would say, to Turkish society for a very long time. In terms of the 3 billion euro, I mean, if you think about it, it's actually a drop in the ocean. It's a tiny amount of money.
Yes, indeed.
If you compare it to what Turkey's already spent, which is something like 11 billion. Of course, it's not immediate delivery of the finance because it doesn't go directly to the Turkish state. It goes through various different NGOs for different projects that have to be agreed between the two parties, and this is a process, and as far as I'm aware, the first money will be delivered by the end of this month.
Right, but then your answer did not help me much as to how to understand the logics behind Turkey's all of these efforts. Just to say we are big inside the EU, or we're big in terms of our relations with the EU, despite all of these possible potential problems and challenges, by accepting all of these preconditions. Ms. Paul, your judgment once again.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by potential problems by accepting the preconditions, if you're referring to the criteria for the visa liberalization.
The criteria also for the visa liberalization, and also about accepting all of these refugees, which could have some background challenges, of course.
Well, in terms of the visa liberalization, I mean, obviously the reforms, the legislation that's getting pushed through, or has been pushed through the Turkish parliament, will actually strengthen Turkey in terms of the laws that it already has, which I think is a positive thing. I mean, in terms of hosting the refugees, I mean, Turkey didn't ask to be the neighbor of Syria. This is geography, and I think, you know, the Turkish state, the Turkish society, the public have showed a great deal of empathy for these poor people who have had to flee their homes. It's not a question of them pushing them out of Turkey. This would be a very unhumanitarian policy to approach.
Right.
I think we need to focus more actually on the approach of the EU rather than Turkey, the EU's approach to burden sharing, to the relocation of these refugees, which hasn't been going as smoothly as it possibly could have.
Well, we understand the problems over there, but Dr. Ali Reza, I think the fundamental question is, what does Turkey have in mind in terms of its strategic positions with the EU? What does Turkey have in mind in terms of its future role, even in the minds of the international community? How does the current actions and inactions related to that specific one? Dr. Ali Reza.
What a great question. You know, when you do go down to the Turkish-Syrian border, you realize that the problems of the Middle East are very much part of the overall equation for Turkey. So Turkey is a player, whether it likes it or not, in the Middle East, and in fact, it wants to play an active role there. But at the same time, it is a member of the Western Alliance. It's a member of NATO. It has a special relationship with the United States, which has been called a model partnership. and it is also an aspirant for EU membership. So it has to balance the two parts of its overall foreign policy constantly, and that's not an easy job. Now, the refugee issue, as I said, which is a byproduct of its engagement with the Middle East, also has implications for its relationship with the EU. And it is, even though the refugee burden is an unwanted one for Turkey, there is a silver lining to this cloud, which is that it has forced the EU in order to accelerate or to shall we say, raise the level of its engagement with Turkey. Now, what will this do to Turkey's overall position in the world? It remains to be seen. Turkey is not in any sense a fully accepted member of the European Union.
Right.
In many ways it's discriminated against, and it knows it. And its value paradoxically, its value to the West is because of its engagement with the Middle East, which brings lots of problems.
Professor Kutlay, before we go, I really want to have your input here and your judgment as well. Can Turkey think about the possibility of others' recognition through continuous commitment made by its own, such as reflected by the refugee crisis? How do you think is the current situation by Turkey's actions and decisions related to Turkey's eventual goal of establishing itself in the region and even beyond?
Actually, in order to consolidate its position in its neighboring environment and beyond, I think Turkey needs to improve its relations with transatlantic world, and especially needs to push hard for European Union membership process. And in the current situation, the revitalization of Turkey-EU relations, I think, is a good opportunity to achieve this. But we should not actually overestimate the current situation, because yes, the parties are cooperating on visa-free travel issue, which is quite important for Turkish business elite and Turkish citizens. Also, they try to cooperate in the migration crisis, which is also quite vital for both parties. But apart from this, in order to improve Turkey's membership process, the parties actually need to open up new negotiating chapters. And in order to open up these new chapters, actually, by one way or another, either Cyprus question needs to be solved, or the veto of Greek Cypriots over the negotiating chapters should be lifted. So in terms of furthering membership process, the parties need to overcome more obstacles. But nevertheless, this is, I think, quite an important kickoff, quite an important start.
All right. Mustafa Mutley, Bülent Ali Riza, and Amanda Paul, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate your insights. Thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Baidu, China's biggest search engine, is in hot water. The death of a college student who received ineffective treatment from a Baidu-recommended hospital has raised questions about the company's cozy relationship with Chinese medical system, and many more. You are watching World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Tian Wei. The death of a 21-year-old college student in China has sparked outrage on the internet against the country's largest search engine, Baidu. The man died after receiving costly treatment in the hospital he found recommended in Baidu's search results. China's internet regulator said on Monday it will send a team to investigate Baidu over this case. The head of the search giant has been summoned by the country's authorities as well, and China's health authorities and medical authorities in the military system will also send investigators to the hospital. Let's take a look at the details.
Business ethics in the spotlight. The death of a Chinese college student has put the country's largest search engine, Baidu, under scrutiny. The 21-year-old suffered a rare form of cancer called synovial sarcoma. After several unsuccessful treatments, he turned to search engine Baidu, and through Baidu's paid results, Wei found treatment at the Beijing Armed Police Corps No. 2 hospital. But after 2 years of costly treatment, the young man passed away in April. Before Wei died, he posted his story on China's popular Q&A website Zhihu in February. In his post, he strongly criticized the hospital that treated him and also condemned Baidu for providing them a platform. The story has sparked anger on the internet. Many condemn Baidu for ranking search results based on how much they pay. This is the second time this year that Baidu is under scrutiny for its business ethics when it comes to advertising and medical information. Earlier this year, Baidu was accused of selling control of some of its illness-related Tiaba forums to private hospitals. According to an online survey by Sina News, nearly half of China's netizens think that Baidu should not allow medical care institutions to advertise on its search engine pages. And over 38% of surveyees said that Baidu should inspect the quality of hospitals that appear in their search results. Baidu's stock plunged almost 8% on Monday. The incident has also cast the spotlight on military hospitals' controversial practice of outsourcing their medical departments to private institutes. Many of these private institutes fall under the Putian Medical Group, including the Department of the Military Hospital at which Wei received treatment. Investigation over the case is now underway, and the debate about Baidu's responsibilities to its users continues.
And for more on the controversy involving China's biggest search engine, Baidu, we are joined here in the Beijing studio by Jay Huang, who is a founding partner of Jaystone Venture and former managing director of Intel China. Welcome, sir. Meanwhile, joining us in the studio in Beijing, we're having Gordon Liu, professor of economics from the National School of Development, Peking University, a pioneer in search of doing research about China's medical reform. And also joining us from New York, we're having Max Wolf, professor of economics from the New School University of New York. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. All right, the backgrounder already helped us to understand what exactly the story was and how different players got involved in this specific case. So, first question I want to raise it to you, Mr. Huang. Is it legal or illegal that Baidu was putting the results related to the hospital which eventually caused the death of this young man, this sophomore from China?
My understanding is probably legal in China right now.
Explain.
I don't think there is a very clear regulation to say this kind of paid advertisement should be classified as advertisement or it's just information sharing. Based on some journalist reports, some legal cases in regarding the situation like this has treated Baidu's case like information sharing for search.
So in other words, this has a lot to do with exactly what kind of legal framework we have in this country.
Exactly. For example, if those paid ad has been classified as advertisement, it should subject to Chinese advertisement law. And clearly that's illegal and they have a force and advertisement.
Mm-hmm. But if not, as information sharing, that would be a different case.
Exactly. I think that legally probably okay, morally it's not acceptable.
Very interesting. Let me go to Professor Wolf in New York. Can we expect companies, particularly large scale, Baidu, the biggest search engine in China, getting 600 million searchers every year, to be morally and ethically responsible if there's no checks and balances?
So it's great to be here. Look, I think generally speaking, it's very hard to get companies to self-regulate. In the few cases where we have success there, it's usually driven by a deep need to manage public perception, which comes from intense competition. Baidu has been good enough at delivering search results to really control and have a very dominant position in the market. Therefore, it's not in a very difficult competitive environment. There's not much reason for them to have to do the quote-unquote best practices because of competition, so you're probably going to need a little bit more clarity in terms of regulation. We have struggled with the same issue here, by the way, with major American companies saying, hey, we just provide a forum and we're not responsible for the information or the veracity of the information that people post on our forum. So it's a digital problem that everybody eventually faces. Very hard to get industry to self-regulate unless there's very intense competition for the client user.
That, of course, is a major issue facing all the search engines in the world, but we have to make clear here, even though search engines around the world face the same issue, but the degrees could be very different.
Yes.
Mr. Huang, help us to understand this. Baidu is not the only company that has been asked to be responsible morally and ethically about what it does. Alibaba at the same time has also been asked, the biggest companies in the world, about responsible for the kind of sellers on its platform, whether it's selling fake goods or not. And Alibaba is saying, we're doing what we can, but we cannot promise anything. So how can we solve this problem? Is there any case studies elsewhere that China can borrow?
Let's just compare what Google does versus what Baidu does in terms of search.
Let's do that.
For search items, if you type on the item on Google, the first few lines is not a paid advertisement. It's whatever the information there. The next few lines is a paid advertisement. And then in there, the upfront have very clear word says ad. So clearly,
at the very beginning.
Very beginning.
Rather at the very bottom line, which is what Baidu is doing right now.
Correct. And more than that, on the Baidu's case, if you want to type something to search, very likely, not 100%, very likely your top and the result is actually a paid advertisement. He didn't clearly say that this is a paid advertisement. As you said, at the bottom of the word, very small font, he actually didn't use an 广告, like advertisement. He used an
promotion.
He used a 推广, you can say promotion or extension, expanding. So I think if somebody accused Baidu misleading, I don't think this accusation is unfair.
Well, of course, you are not a lawyer, and we also need the whole legal process to work in order to have a judgment. But let me go to you, Professor Liu. A lot of this have to do with time, some suggest. For example, Google, back in the year 2003, it was supporting many of the Canadian pharmaceutical companies to sell so-called illegal prescription or non-prescription drugs to American consumers because it's much cheaper, the Canadian drugs compared to the American ones. Of course, the industry complained in the US, and eventually lobbying works and things change. Eventually, Google paid $500 million US, the biggest fine ever for a search engine in the world, and solved the problem. But what about this time? What do you make of the current situation if we could do a comparison, Professor Liu?
Well, I'm not an expert in the internet, but
you are in medical care.
Yes, but if I look at this issue from users' perspective, I would say the quality of search by any search engine should be an outcome of both government regulations and market competitions. Both have to be very important role in driving the quality of search.
Are you saying there's no competition? Well, there's Bing, for example, by Microsoft, and there's also Yahoo over there.
We're talking about the single largest engine entity in the country. In the past, when Google was here, so there are two competitors. I think if Google was here, probably the situation might be different. Of course, we are concerned something else. So I think in the long run, we better consider both government regulations and market competitions, because that's a very crucial part of the quality control.
Talking about quality control, talking about the administration and management of the overall system, we have seen the investigation already going on at this moment. Both the cyber administration of China, together with the trade side and together with the health side, and also the military, because there's a military hospital involved as well, all went in and tried to investigate. What do you think, Mr. Huang, from your perspective, should be the priorities for this investigation? And during this investigation, fruitful reports, what kind of nature should be regarded as fruitful? And eventually, how should all of these reports and investigations lead us, and where should they lead us to? More banning of certain things, or more legal framework regarding competition and encouraging competition?
My view of this is the first priority is the medical system. My view is for a student like the tragedy and we're talking about, and he has to go through and search engine for medical advice. I think this is something wrong. He should get a medical advice from a professional. So I would give a priority to the medical reform in this country. In terms of regulating like internet companies, I think, and I agree with Professor Liu, and definitely need a regulation and strict and regulation monitoring there, and maybe more we need a competition. Because we know the competition drive the innovation, and so we need both of them. In terms of a regulation, I also want to see, I do not want to see too much government intervention in terms of managing the internet company's daily operation.
Very interesting opinions over there, because you were involved also in the high-tech firms, running high-tech firms here in China, coming from the U.S. Professor Wolf, what's your judgment? Of course, you're in the U.S., you might not necessarily know all the details, but I'm sure with your experiences, you could tell in a way about the kind of directions that people should think, or the kind of directions that the investigation should go. Go ahead, Professor.
So we do follow the Chinese internet companies, including Baidu, very closely because they're major global players and innovators. I do think in order to clear things like this up, as China pivots to being a consumer society and a consumer economy, more consumer protection is unambiguously needed. Some of that's culture, so it's a culture of consumer protection and consumer acknowledgement, which I think is just beginning to develop in China, but maybe more mature in a place like the US, which has had a very consumer-based economy for a very long time. That's one. Two, I think a little more robust competition for something like search would help, because part of what you want to do is have market solutions, and the best market solution to make companies accountable is for people to feel like they have an alternative. If people really don't have much of an alternative, it's really hard to get companies to adhere to best standards without forcing them with a sort of heavier regulatory hand. And last but not least, if you're going to be a consumer culture, you need a lot more consumer protection.
We don't want to go just to one side, blaming one company, because the investigation is still going on. Many details we do not know as outsiders. But in that case, I want to read a quote coming from Baidu's own statement, talking about their attitude. Of course, they're saying they want to cooperate with the investigators in whatever way that is demanded. But at the same time, it is also saying, and here I quote, Baidu said, "We strongly call on the management departments of related hospital and bureaus to strengthen hospital supervision, and in order to have a better environment," end of quote. Of course, that made us to push our arrow to the hospital side. We have seen in China the blossom of private hospitals in which also related to this specific investigation. Between 2005 to 2015, over 9,000 new facilities opened their doors, private ones, in China. Today, they make up about half of all hospitals in China. Meanwhile, the market volume of the health industry is booming, rising from over 1 trillion in 2010 to 2.2 trillion in 2014, and is estimated to reach about 4 trillion for the year 2019. Huge amount of money, Professor Liu. No wonder we're having a lot of challenges when it comes to medical reform in this country. What do you make of this hospital's involvement? It is a number 2 armed forces corp hospital. However, what exactly is responsible for this is not the hospital itself, but rather the hospital lent its name to a private healthcare entity. Eventually, that healthcare entity ran this program in which the young man did not receive sufficient treatment. So, who's responsible?
Well, in terms of the entities for being responsible for the incident, I think there are both technical reasons and also information conditions as well. From a technical standpoint, we all know this young man had end-stage cancer.
Right.
It's almost impossible for any treatment to cure him, to save his life.
Yearly operation or chemotherapy,
no matter
it
where
didn't work.
Where he went. Secondly, I think both the hospitals, both the military hospital and the private hospital, probably have provided some misleading information, making him to believe that there was better chance if he was put on this cell therapy. So in that regard, I think it's more like moral issues involved. But I think overall we probably should pay all attention to the moral part of the story because there's a technique issue involved.
But before I go to Mr. Huang, let me ask you a little bit of follow-up. There has been a lot of stories about the so-called Putianxi, which is Putian is a place in China's Fujian province. A lot of medical entrepreneurs started their businesses from there, and they become the most powerful forces in China's private medical practice. So far, this is also this story involved one of those from the Putianxi. But having said that, though, is this going to be the start to rather search or going to do soul searching for the private entrepreneurs regarding medical care in China, or this is rather an overall problem facing China's medical care system as a whole?
Well, I think we got to be very careful when we interpret this story because this one Putian hospital group may have made some mistake by exaggerating their treatment effectiveness.
They were talking about in the advertisement, it is in collaboration with Stanford University. Of course, that was not the case. It was fake.
Right, yeah. But my point is, actually, in China, we do need more private hospitals to supplement the medical services that are currently not sufficiently provided by public hospitals. Actually, this story has two parties involved. One party is the military hospital, another party is the private hospital. We should not just criticize one side of the incident, right? The public hospital should be primarily responsible for this.
Okay, very interesting. I know you're a pusher in China about private hospitals getting ever more popular in this country. No wonder you're giving that opinion. But Mr. Huang, your opinion here?
Well, I read Baidu's statement. My interpretation is everything they say is put under the legal boundary. I think as a dominant position, a company or monopoly company, I think a public and treat them much higher standard. I think if the executive only think about what do they do legally, it's going to short off the public expectation.
There is a legal issue. There is also the medical reform issue. There's the credibility issue, ethical issue, moral issue as well. Many things in one. That's why it's become such a debate in China. We're going to continue, of course, our discussion about that in the later programs of the World Insight. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Jay Huang, Gordon Liu, and Max Wolf. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.